Open on a close-up of a perfectly manicured lawn, then a sudden, chaotic scattering of chicken feed. Sound, a tense, rising orchestral sting cut by a single defiant cluck. Voiceover, whispering gravelly. They sent the letter. Eviction. They thought they'd clipped my wings. But they forgot one thing. Quick cuts. A red-faced man in a blazer slamming a door. A woman's determined eyes filling with tears. A blurry shot of a clipboard with the words, emotional support, being checked off. Voiceover, rising fierce. You can't ban family. My chickens are staying. Final shot. A flock of plump hens strutting proudly across the lawn, framed by a pristine white picket fence. Sound, a triumphant, brassy chord. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, stiff and formal. A physical manifestation of the iron fist, concealed within the velvet glove of the Highland Creek Homeowners Association. It landed on Eliza Liz Vance's polished mahogany kitchen island with a soft, ominous thud. Liz, 32, a freelance architect whose life was a series of meticulously planned projects, felt the familiar cold dread before she even touched the embossed seal. She was stirring a pot of artisanal yogurt, the creamy white swirling in a heavy ceramic bowl, but her hands stilled. Through the large window over the sink, the late afternoon sun cast long, peaceful shadows over her backyard. There, under the shade of a flourishing plum tree, her flock of 4 hens, Amelia, Ginger, Penny, and the fiercely territorial Harriet, were scratching happily in their custom-built coop. A miniature craftsman bungalow complete with its own terracotta roof. The hens. This was about the hens. She ripped open the envelope. The paper inside was thick, expensive, and the font unforgivingly corporate. The key paragraph, bolded for emphasis, hit her like a punch to the diaphragm. The keeping of livestock, poultry, or any other animal not customarily considered a household pet is a direct violation of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&R Article 4. Section 3. You are hereby issued a notice of violation and required to remove the said poultry from the property within 7 days of this notice. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. Liz sank onto a stool. The world around her, the spotless quartz countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the very essence of the suburban perfection she'd bought into, seeming to tilt. This wasn't a fine. This was an ultimatum. This was Arthur Finch, the HOA president, finally making his move. Arthur Finch, a retired corporate lawyer, 58, with a meticulously sculpted silver pompadour and a suit for every day of the week, even for weeding his prize-winning roses. He'd lived in Highland Creek for 20 years and saw himself as its benevolent dictator. He had a pathological aversion to anything he deemed disorderly, and Liz's chickens, which provided her with a profound, grounding connection to something real and earthy, were his personal crusade. Her heart began to pound a frantic, uneven rhythm. It wasn't just about the eggs or the aesthetics. It was about control. It was about Arthur's unwavering belief that his vision of Highland Creek, a sterile, silent, perfectly green grid, was the only acceptable one. And for Liz, it was about life. The chickens had come into her life 2 years ago, right after her debilitating battle with an aggressive autoimmune disorder. The recovery had been a long, dark tunnel of physical pain and soul-crushing anxiety. Her therapist had suggested a connection to nature, a small, manageable responsibility. She'd gotten Amelia and Ginger first, 2 docile, inquisitive Rhode Island Reds. The act of caring for them, of collecting a warm egg from the nesting box, of watching their goofy, focused scratching, had been the anchor that pulled her back to shore. They were not pets. They were her peace. A sharp knock on the front door startled her. It couldn't be him, could it? She peered through the peephole. It was Brenda Peterson, Arthur's vice president and most loyal lapdog, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Liz sighed, straightened her posture, and opened the door a crack. "Liz," Brenda chirped, a smile that didn't reach her eyes plastered on her face. Her voice was syrupy, laced with a barely concealed triumph. "Just following up on the notice of violation, dear." making sure you received it. I received it, Brenda, Liz said, her voice measured and cool, a deliberate counterpoint to the heat rising in her chest. 7 days. That's the deadline, correct? Brenda's smile tightened. 7 calendar days, yes. Arthur is very firm on this. It's for the integrity of the community, you understand. We can't have livestock roaming about. It sets a terrible precedent. They don't roam, Liz countered instantly. Their coop is immaculate, better built than most sheds in this neighborhood, and they're confined to the backyard, which is fully fenced. You know this, Brenda. You've walked the perimeter. Brenda's eyes darted past Liz toward the window, then back. The bylaw is clear, honey. No poultry. I just hate to see those lovely architectural plans of yours get buried under a pile of legal fees. Arthur doesn't bluff. She leaned in conspiratorially, her perfume an overwhelming cloud of artificial jasmine. Just get rid of them. It's easier. Easier for who, Brenda? Liz asked, her resolve hardening like concrete. She didn't budge, blocking the doorway completely. For Arthur? For the community that only wants picture-perfect uniformity? Or for the person whose health and peace of mind these animals are essential for? Brenda's practiced smile finally faltered. A flicker of genuine malice crossed her face. Don't be dramatic, Liz. They're just chickens. You're an adult. You can cope. She gave a final, condescending pat to her clipboard. 7 days, Liz. Tick-tock. And with a sharp pivot, she marched back down the pathway. Liz slammed the door, the sound echoing in the silence of her perfect house. Just chickens. The casual dismissal was the final push. It wasn't just Arthur. It was the whole culture of judgment and small-minded tyranny that had been subtly smothering her since she moved in. She walked out to the backyard, the scent of fresh-cut grass and plum blossoms a brief comfort. Harriet, the feistiest of the bunch, a black Australorp, clucked a loud, demanding greeting. Liz scooped her up, feeling the warm, light weight of the bird in her arms. Harriet settled, her small heart beating rapidly against Liz's palm. They want to take you away, girl, Liz whispered into Harriet's soft, black feathers. They think you're just poultry. They think I can just cope. She set Harriet down. She had 7 days. 7 days to fight a decades-old corporate lawyer who had nothing better to do than enforce arbitrary rules and a powerful organization with seemingly unlimited legal funds. For the next 2 days, Liz was a blur of frantic action and fear. She consulted the CC&Rs one last time, poring over every word. She called a lawyer, a friend of a friend, who specialized in real estate. The lawyer's advice was a cold splash of reality. The bylaw is explicit. Liz, unless you can prove the bylaw is being enforced selectively, which is hard, or that there's a higher federal or state law that overrides it, you're sunk. You'll spend $50,000 and still lose. Just rehome the birds, rehome the birds. The thought brought her to tears. It felt like tearing a piece of her own soul out. She sat late Wednesday night, staring at the violation notice and a stack of her medical records. Anxiety disorder, chronic fatigue, recovery notes. She picked up a medical journal article on the documented therapeutic effects of animal companionship. Therapeutic, emotional, a memory flashed through her mind. A news clip from years ago about a man who flew with his pig. The term. She typed 3 words into the search bar. HOA Emotional Support Animal. The results were a confusing mix of legal jargon and sensational headlines. But one phrase, repeated across multiple legal aid sites, suddenly shone like a beacon. The Fair Housing Act. FHA. She spent the next 48 hours in a desperate, single-minded tunnel of research. The FHA, she learned, required HOAs to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. And that included allowing emotional support animals, ESAs, even if the HOA's bylaws generally prohibited pets or specific types of animals. The law didn't care if it was a dog, a cat, or a bird, so long as a licensed mental health professional verified the person's need for the animal to mitigate symptoms of a recognized disability. It was a loophole. No, it wasn't a loophole. It was a right. A shield provided by federal law against the kind of bureaucratic tyranny Arthur Finch represented. A tiny, ferocious spark ignited in her chest. She had a diagnosed condition, documented by a licensed therapist. She had animals whose presence was demonstrably vital to her stability and health. Friday morning, 2 days before the deadline, she had an emergency session with Dr. Chen, her therapist. She laid out the notice, the CCNRs, and the FHA research. Dr. Chen listened patiently, then looked at Liz with solemn eyes. "Liz," she said, leaning forward, "do you believe that your 4 hens, Amelia, Ginger, Penny, and Harriet, provide you with the necessary emotional support to mitigate the symptoms of your anxiety and fatigue?" "I don't believe it, Dr. Chen," Liz said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know it. They are the reason I got out of bed for 6 months. They are my focus, my responsibility, my calm. Without them, I will regress." "I will," Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "The legal requirements are specific, but your need is clear. And your documentation is solid." She tapped a pen against a pad. "I will draft the letter of prescription." The first fine notice arrived precisely at 9 a.m. on Monday, tucked neatly into Liz Vance's mailbox. It wasn't sent via certified mail. It was hand-delivered, a deliberate act of petty aggression. The paper was bright yellow, an immediate, aggressive flag against the pale envelope, and demanded $100 for the first day of unapproved livestock retention. Further warning stated that the fine would double every consecutive day of noncompliance, capped at $2,000 per week until the violation was cured. The notice completely ignored her Federal Housing Act, FHA, request. Liz didn't tremble, didn't panic. The fear had crystallized into a cold, hard determination. She knew this was Arthur Finch's immediate counterattack, a test of financial attrition, a wager that the cumulative weight of arbitrary penalties would break her before the law could protect her. She didn't reach for her phone to call her friend's lawyer. She went straight to the HOA's online payment portal, not to pay the fine, but to initiate a new action. She drafted a formal dispute of violation and fines, attaching her signed letter from Dr. Chen and the FHA request. In the dispute's narrative field, she typed, "This is not a pet violation. This is a request for reasonable accommodation for a disability under the Fair Housing Act, 42 U.S.C., paragraph 3604F. The immediate imposition of fines during the mandatory review period constitutes discriminatory retaliation, which carries civil penalties of up to $27,000 for a first offense. These fines are rejected in their entirety. Any further action will be reported to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, as a federal civil rights violation." She hit send. She was no longer Liz the architect. She was Liz the advocate, armed with legal statutes and a willingness to wage war on paper. The immediate consequence wasn't legal, but social and devastatingly personal. Later that afternoon, a crew arrived at the empty lot 2 doors down from Liz, a lot that had been designated a shared green space since she moved in. They were not landscaping. They were erecting a sign. A large, garish, custom-made sign on a heavy-duty post. The bold, black letters screamed, "Community warning. Unauthorized livestock residing in vicinity. Be aware of potential noise, odor, and pest infestation." It was a blatant, targeted attack. Arthur hadn't just rejected her claim. He was attempting to turn the community against her, to make her an ostracized pariah. Liz, who had been on a video call with a client, excused herself and walked outside, her face burning. The noise was unbearable, the pounding of the hammer, the scraping of the shovel, and the sudden, uneasy quiet of her usually bustling street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their expressions a mix of curiosity and silent judgment. She strode up to the foreman, her heart hammering a furious rhythm against her ribs. "What is the permit for this sign?" she demanded, her voice tight with suppressed fury. The foreman, a heavy-set man in a dirty vest, barely glanced up. "HOA order, ma'am. Mr. Finch paid for it himself. Says it's a necessary public health notification." "It's libel," Liz hissed, her gaze sweeping over the ugly yellow and black signage. "And it is specifically targeting me and my federally protected animals." "Just putting up the sign, lady," The foreman shrugged, turning back to his work. Liz looked down the street. A small knot of people was gathering. Brenda Peterson, filming the action on her phone with a grotesque look of self-righteous satisfaction, and the Harrisons, her next-door neighbors, whose mild-mannered neutrality was beginning to look a lot like cowardice. Then she saw Margaret Chen, a kindly older woman and fellow architectural enthusiast who lived across the street, emerging from her house, her face etched with concern. "Liz, dear, what is all this commotion?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's Arthur's latest tactic, Margaret," Liz said, pointing at the sign. "He's trying to shame me. He's trying to manufacture a health concern where none exists." Brenda Peterson seized the opportunity, projecting her voice to the small crowd. "It's a necessary precaution. We don't know what kind of diseases those birds carry. This is why we have rules, to protect our property values, to protect our children. My chickens are meticulously cared for and kept in a sanitary coop." Liz shot back, her voice ringing with the need for truth. "They are cleaner than half the dogs in this neighborhood. This isn't about health. It's about Arthur's power trip. And what I'm doing is protected by federal law, the law that stops discrimination against people with disabilities." Brenda's camera dropped slightly. The word disability hit the small crowd with a perceptible thud, but Arthur Finch hadn't come this far to be deterred by a moment of awkward truth. His silver Audi purred silently to a stop nearby. He got out, impeccably dressed, carrying a briefcase, his demeanor radiating an icy calm that was more menacing than any yelling. He ignored Liz completely, addressing the neighbors with a soothing, patronizing tone. "I understand this is disruptive, folks, but we must be proactive. Ms. Vance's claims of an emotional need are currently being reviewed by legal counsel. But the bylaw is clear, and the simple fact is that poultry does not belong in Highland Creek. We must uphold the integrity of our community standards." He gestured towards Liz's house. "I'm simply asking Ms. Vance to respect the community she chose to live in." Liz stepped forward, planting herself between Arthur and the humiliating sign. "You receive my documentation, Arthur. You are fully aware that my animals are verified emotional support animals. You are not upholding integrity. You are engaging in discriminatory harassment. The community standards do not trump the Fair Housing Act." Arthur finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold, flat chips of ice. "I advise you to cease your unfounded accusations. Ms. Vance, my legal team is of the opinion that a chicken does not meet the criteria for a reasonable accommodation, and the courts, I assure you, will agree. We are prepared to litigate this to the highest degree to protect Highland Creek's covenants. You are out of your depth." He tapped his briefcase. "My lawyer's hourly rate is more than your weekly fine, Ms. Vance, and they are already billing." The threat was clear. "I can afford to bury you in legal fees." It was a powerful psychological blow, playing directly into the fear of financial ruin. Liz felt a momentary surge of nausea. The reality of taking on a well-funded, professionally litigious opponent hitting her hard, just as the silence stretched taut. Margaret Chen, who had been quietly watching the exchange, stepped forward. "Arthur," Margaret said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I was the head of the Architecture Review Committee for 12 years. I know the CC&Rs inside and out, and I also know that Liz's coop is impeccably maintained. Frankly, the odor from the compost pile in your own yard last summer was far more noticeable than anything coming from those 4 little birds." A ripple went through the crowd. Brenda's mouth dropped open. Arthur Finch turned on Margaret, his composure slipping for the first time. "Margaret, you are well out of line. This has nothing to do with my garden." "It has everything to do with hypocrisy, Arthur," Margaret countered, her chin lifting. "We have 27 dogs registered in this neighborhood. We have a bylaw against excessive noise, and the Harrisons' Labrador barks at every dust mote. We have a bylaw against unapproved structures, and Ken Miller's satellite dish is an eyesore. Why are you focusing your entire legal budget on 4 quiet hens owned by a woman with a medical need while ignoring every other minor infraction?" Arthur recovered instantly, his lawyer mask snapping back into place. "Because the bylaw specifically mentions poultry, Margaret. This is an open and shut case of enforcement. Ms. Vance is grasping at straws." He looked at Liz one last time, a look of chilling, triumphant certainty. "You have until the end of the week, Ms. Vance. Then the fines become punitive. Trust me, you do not want to continue down this road." He got back into his Audi and drove away, leaving the humiliating sign standing sentinel over Liz's yard. Liz felt the weight of the moment. The neighborhood was now polarized. Margaret was an unexpected ally, but the vast majority of her neighbors were either cowed by Arthur or genuinely bought into his fear-mongering about property values. She looked at Margaret, a silent thank you passing between them. "Don't worry, dear," Margaret said, placing a comforting hand on Liz's arm. "You're right. He's a bully. But you need more than the law. You need the truth." Liz nodded, taking strength from the older woman's defiance. She knew Arthur's strategy was to create a hostile environment. Her counter-strategy had to be twofold: legal rigor and undeniable truth. That evening, Liz sat at her computer and drafted a letter. Not to the HOA, not to HUD, but to her neighbors. She kept it professional, factual, but injected a quiet emotional plea. She carefully explained her diagnosis, the vital role her emotional support chickens played in her recovery, and the protection afforded her by the FHA. She didn't attack Arthur. She simply laid out the facts of her case and the federal law he was violating. She attached a clear, high-resolution photo of her pristine coupe. She ended with a simple sentence: "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for my federally protected right to health and peace in my own home. I hope you can understand." She printed 70 copies on high-quality paper. The next morning, under the cover of the pre-dawn darkness, Liz crept out and